Does everyone remember when then vice presidential candidate Tim Walz told us that he'd become friends with school shooters? Take a listen, just in case you've forgotten.
I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it.
Well, Tim Walz's friendship circle apparently extends beyond school shooters. This in from the Gateway Pundit today. Minnesota scandal explodes. Over 480 DHS employees accuse Governor Tim Walz of orchestrating a massive cover-up, retaliated against whistleblowers to shield Somali illegal fraud ring that stole over $1 billion. The Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is under fire after employees from the Minnesota DHS issued a bombshell statement accusing the far-left governor of orchestrating a sweeping cover-up to shield a sprawling Somali immigrant fraud ring that stole more than $1 billion in taxpayer funds and punishing whistleblowers who tried to stop it. According to DHS insiders, Walz not only ignored early warnings, but actively retaliated against agency employees who sounded the alarm. They now accuse his administration of using political intimidation, monitoring, threats, and agency manipulation to suppress evidence and silence witnesses. As the Gateway Pundit reported, 70 members of the Somali community in Minnesota were involved in stealing $250 million in COVID funds that were intended to feed children. Millions of dollars were stolen from American taxpayers and sent overseas to Somalia, and 80% of the money has not been recovered. 7 defendants were tried in connection with the scheme on charges relating to stealing more than $40 million in taxpayer funds, and 5 were found guilty. However, the FBI is still investigating an attempt by a Somali woman to bribe one of the jurors with $120,000 in cash. However, the fraud extends deeper, with multiple schemes of this nature occurring over the last 5 years. Per the New York Times, quote, federal prosecutors say that 59 people have been convicted in those schemes so far and that more than $1 billion in taxpayer money has been stolen in 3 plots they are investigating, end quote. During an interview with NBC's Kristen Welker, Walz responded by touting Minnesota's generosity and claiming that the state attracts opportunists because it's prosperous and well-run. Rather than taking accountability, he dismissed concerns about foreign-led theft as a lazy demonization. Welker said, dozens of people of East African descent have been charged, convicted, and sentenced for stealing more than $1 billion in taxpayer money from government programs during COVID. As you know, Governor, that is more than Minnesota spends each year to run its Department of Corrections. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state? Walz says, well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated. But that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy. Now, while it is actually true that demonizing an entire community because of the actions of a few can be seen as lazy, the point here is that the story with Walz in particular goes much deeper when it comes to this scheme. Minnesota DHS employees, speaking as a collective group, issued the following statement outlining why they are now escalating matters to federal authorities. Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on, hoping for a partnership in stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. Tim Walz systematically retaliated against whistleblowers using monitoring, threats, repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. We'll read you a little bit more of that statement. It says that instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation by Tim Walz, certain DFL members, and an indifferent mainstream media. Imagine. It's scary, isolating, and left us wondering who we can turn to. In addition to retaliating against Whistleblower, Tim Walz disempowered the Office of the Legislative Auditor, allowing agencies to disregard their audit findings and guidance. Media and politicians supporting Tim Walz or the DFL agenda attacked whistleblowers who were trying to raise red flags on fraudulent activities. This is a cascade of systemic failures leading up to Tim Walz. Agency leaders appointed by Walz willfully disregarded rules and laws to keep fraud reports quiet, even to the extent of threatening families of whistleblowers. The rest of the statement goes on to describe more of their ordeal. Of particular note, we wanted to read this portion, quote, "As staff, we firsthand witnessed and observed fraud happening, yet we were shut down, reassigned, and told to keep quiet, sometimes more. Leadership did not want to appear to discriminate against certain communities and were unwilling to take action, such as stopping fraud, that would have an adverse impact on their image." End quote. Now, quite clearly, this is not the first instance. There have been numerous instances of such behavior by members of the Somali community. The article we read there referenced this instance where 70 members of the Somali community in Minnesota stole about $250 million in COVID funds, and millions of those dollars went overseas to Somalia. 80% of the stolen COVID money was never recovered. Recently, a jury found a Somali migrant, Abdifatah Yusuf, guilty of a $7.2 million home healthcare fraud case. And despite the jury finding him guilty, the judge, Sarah West, last week decided that they got it wrong, overturning the verdict and issuing a judgment of acquittal. So we do see a pattern here. These so-called minority communities commit crimes, and these hard-left judges release them back into the community, where the example must be made of these people to deter them from committing such crimes. Quite the opposite is going on. These decisions from these courts and judges and the left and Walz in general is essentially encouraging the behavior, and then when anyone reports on this, it gets more attention than the crime itself, and furthermore, those reporting on it are painted as racists or xenophobes or whatever other slur you can think of. It's like the Italian mob never existed and it was never dismantled by Rico. The fact is that race exists, racial groups exist, and clearly there are a group of Somalis in America who are defrauding American taxpayers and the government. The very real problem is when we have something like the Somali community. You can't have your cake and eat it. Oh, you're going to blame the Somali community? Well, yes, if you're going to say that these people defrauding Americans are part of the Somali community, then it is going to reflect on the Somali community. And why is there a Somali community? Are you part of America, or is there a little Somalia in America? What's going on here? You come to a new country, you embrace its culture, its laws. It doesn't mean you forget your history or your background, but you don't move to a new country to turn that country into the country you came from, and certainly not through defrauding the new country and its tax-paying citizens, and furthermore in order to send it back to your old country. If you want to enrich your old country, stay in it. Fix its problems from within. This type of behavior is what is driving the America First conversation, with more people growing in the opinion that immigration should require assimilation. You come here, you love and serve America, you contribute to America, you embrace America and her values and her laws, culture and customs, or stay home. As far as Tim Walz and Democrats who continue to allow, and it seems encourage, this behavior go, we'd like to know when the arrests and court dates are happening. It's all well and good for these things to be exposed to reinforce our already perceived reality of the left, if you will. But who is going to hold them to account? Thus far, we've seen none of that. If we don't see accountability, we won't see change.